Chapter 1. Fear Not.
Stella's pod was humming softly, glowing like an incandescent plastic coffin. Its base was lit up pale white
as the lights on the hatch sequenced slowly from red to blue to green. She'd recently dipped her beak into the royal stash to purchase her own top-of-the-line leisure pod. It sat conveniently on the far side of the suite, rendering her journeys down to the lounges a thing of the past.
Now she could while away the hours on her own AI fantasy island without ever having to leave the castle.
Valentine hoped it was just a phase, how she was coping with the king's ill health. But she wasn't looking forward to rousing her highness from her traveling, especially this late at night.
Your Grace,
she called out quietly and gave the top of the machine 2 reluctant knocks with her furry yellow paw. No answer.
Leroy was sprawled out in the large canopy bed. If not for his loud snoring, she might have thought him dead.
His face was gaunt and pallid, a ghostly color, and there was a trail of junky drool from his thin lips to the dimple at the bottom of his chin. The dark circles beneath his eyes aged in the past 17 years.
He'd been hitting the pipe hard lately. His apathy towards raising his royal standing was cause for concern. But death cared not that he was ill-equipped. The prince would be king by and by.
Princess Stella,
Valentine whispered loudly. Stella didn't stir. She was lost in a dream, barefoot in a field of jade maiden grass, pale skin warm beneath 2 sparkling suns. Up ahead, she spotted a formidable figure. Broad body, red horns atop a wide green head. A cold fear gripped her until a beastly voice spoke gently in her mind.
Be not afraid of death and bane. Take me as your boon companion.
A warm breeze tussled the feather reeds as she walked towards the strange monster, his muscular physique growing clearer in the golden light.
His skin was taut and leathery, red with beryl streaks like a snake, the color of lust. Chocolate brown wings poked out through the long crimson cape hanging to his bare feet, and though his red eyes had a playful, mischievous glow, his face was a terrifying mess of gnarled plates and scales. He was close now, his presence impending. At least twice her height, somehow she could tell he was there for redress. His voice resonated queerly, 3 octaves overlaid.
I grow powerful, even while you sleep.
As his black talons delicately pushed her raven hair behind her ear, a wormhole of blue and yellow luminance began to spiral in the sky. When ships started passing through, she recognized it, the Capricorn Gate.
So much power you've yet to discover, but you're yet a sheepish lass, holding back, concerned by clowns and cur.
One of the suns was sinking into the horizon, glowing pink and purple. The sky was ablaze as the gate spun brightly.
Call on me when cowed, and I will feast on your fear. Together we'll crush all who'd carp and quarrel. 'Twas I have made you queen, and together we shall rule.
She grinned, empowered by the notion she could call upon this mighty beast. The challenges ahead would not suffer her reticence.
She could have stayed there forever, basking in the demon's confidence and encouragement. But as he reached out his hand, the grass began to rustle. A strong gust billowed his cape as he handed her a small black box. It vibrated as she felt the smooth metallic covering and fingered the harsh edges. Something was moving inside.
There's something terrible in this box.
Up above, the gate was darkening, spinning off axis as it sucked in on itself. Before long, a large black hole was devouring the light of the suns. As she stood there in astonishment, the demon spoke in the voice of King Jonathan.
Sweet daughter, are you ready for your mission? Will you protect your kingdom?
The wind was cold now, howling as it bent the grass to the quaking ground.
Yes, Father!
She called out, struggling to keep her balance.
Will you fight for your family?
She screamed as the ground fell out beneath her and a tornado sucked her off her feet.
His crimson hand was out of reach as she twisted up and up, powerless to the pull of the void. Her head felt like lead, all of her cells withering under the pressure. But just as she thought she'd implode, she was pulled right through. The other side was pitch black. She wasn't sure she still had a body. Untethered by corporal sensations, she floated aimlessly through the formlessness, peppered by anxious longing. Finally, when she'd been reduced to nothing more than a confused whisper, desperate for connection, the backside of the vortex reappeared with a radiant yellow eye in its center. Its edges were coated in blood and rimmed with thorns. Its hypnotic stare drew her in, fusing their consciousness into one. Instantly, her perception expanded beyond anything she had ever imagined. Sights and sounds and feelings cascaded in as memories of endless lifetimes filled her with a powerful wisdom, untouched by the footprints of life and death. Time was irrelevant. It was as if she was experiencing everything that had ever happened to everyone, all at once. But then, as the eye blinked shut, her awareness drained back into the blackness, and fear once again spread its toxic cloud. Over and over, the eye opened and closed, holding her under its spell, lifting her consciousness up to elation and ecstasy, then dragging her back down into lonely sorrow. Finally, as she cried out, begging for the madness to end, the matrix shifted. Suddenly, she was atop a bizarre throne of bones in a dusky temple, with her demon friend standing over her shoulder, angled plates spread out wide in a sinister smile. Somewhere, off in the shadows, she could hear a low moaning, an awful sound. The air was heavy with the foul stench of decay, the walls covered in a dark goo that shimmied and twitched as if it were alive. In the center of the room, rising up from the sticky floor, was a large, polished black monolith. Surrounding it was a circle of 12 reptilian soldiers, all bowing in obeisance. She listened in to hear their deep, monotonous chanting. Shame, fear, chaos, control, born in the shadow of your realm. Shame, fear, chaos, control, born in the shadow of your realm. The moaning and screaming grew louder. It sounded like the agony of children. She looked to the beast in dismay, but he just nodded towards her hands. As she looked down, she realized she was again holding the small black box. It vibrated curiously, but as she went to open it, the goo slithered up her throne and onto her feet. She panicked, but as she rose to flee, she dropped the box and it shattered into pieces. Amongst the shards, a grotesque form took shape, a bizarre three-headed worm coiled in a slimy spiral. The creature let out a little hiss and then wriggled towards her, 6 unholy eyes gleaming like emeralds, scores of tiny teeth glistening in its mouths. She tried to run, but her feet were stuck. She braced herself for the bite, but the worm paused and then delicately nibbled around her toes, like a caterpillar on a leaf. Her feet were cocooned in a golden aura as they got free. The worm looked up at her and let out another little hiss before slithering off, leaving a trail of phosphorescence as it chomped through the goo. Lost in their trance, the soldiers didn't notice until the worm had latched a mouth onto one of their legs. His screams roused his comrades from their daze. They came to his aid and tried to pull it off, but the worm just broke apart and then quickly sprouted new heads. They struck with their swords, but with each cut, puffs of light burst forth and new worms kept growing. The reptilians panicked. Nothing they did was helping. In just a few moments, they were covered by a ravenous swarm of parasites, leeching their blood and gobbling flesh and organs. Stella watched in disbelief. When the frenzy was finally over, the pieces reassembled back into one large worm, which took off into the sky.
Let no inferior disquiet you. Claim your true power. Go now and manifest your divine destiny.
She pondered the demon's words as she stared at the large pile of bones glistening in the golden haze.
Your Grace.
The artificial reality glitched as an outside voice broke her concentration. It was muffled, but she knew who it was. Her body twitched like she'd fallen, but desperately she fixed her eyes on the pixelated sky as the worm flew into the vortex.
Your Grace, please, it's urgent.
As Valentine lifted the metal bar on the side of the hatch, the dull light of the lanterns poured into the pod, and the black hole exploded into a brilliant blue and yellow fractal.
So below.
The beast receded into that murky space on the edge of dreams as she lay there motionless, irked that her furlough from the physical realm was over. Clothed head to toe in her skin-tight silver two-skin, her heart fluttered as the thousands of electrodes inside the suit pulsed and hummed.
Your Grace.
The large paw gently shook her shoulder until she stubbornly removed the virtual reality goggles and round headphones.
Oh, what is it, Valentine?
She whinged as the malleable antenna atop her noggin unplugged from the magnetic socket and the pod powered down with a low drone.
I'm sorry, Your Grace, but he's asking for you.
What's wrong? Has he worsened?
I'm terribly sorry, Your Grace. He's taken another turn. Mender Jenki wanted to call the savant for his parting prayer, but the king wouldn't allow it. He dismissed them all, asked for you.
It grieved Valentine to bear such news. Though the king was in terrible pain, she selfishly wanted him to stick around. The moment he passed, the buzzards would swoop down to feed. She glanced back at Leroy and tried to imagine that lost boy atop the throne of Gian Khand. There was trouble ahead for Bokhara. Stella's hair fell over her shoulders as she removed her hood. She jumped up and shimmied out of her two-skin, flawless skin glistening with sweat as her curves cast an hourglass on the cold stone. One of the most alluring women Valentine had ever seen. There, in the dull, spurious glow before the underground dawn, the princess's exotic beauty seemed implausible. Her large eyes were a rare, brilliant green, lashes like spider legs. A subtle cleft perked the tip of her bonny nose. Her cheekbones were even higher than her husband's. She could have been a supermodel on Earth, but Stella knew little of that world, nearly 750 million miles away. Besides, she'd have found that life tawdry. The gawking and admiration were a bitter fruit. Of Stella's many issues, vanity was not chief among them. She threw on her pink Vitruvian silk robe in a haste, then slipped into her Centurion llama fur slippers before exiting the elegant suite. Valentine was close behind, ready with the green velvet shawl. She strode rapidly through a cloud of breath towards the king's chamber, where he intended to die.
It's freezing out here.
Valentine gently placed the heavy cape over Stella's shoulders.
They do not heat the hallways at night. It's especially brisk this evening.
I guess they don't light them either. I can't see a thing.
Stella was clearly shaken. The king had never been graced with a daughter, and he was the only father figure she'd ever had. Their relationship was profound. When Leroy was a boy, from time to time when he thought his son was growing spoiled, King Jonathan would shove him in a leader and send him down to the lower city to see how the other half lived. Stella was 12 when he'd spotted her passed out in an alley in Ophion's playground and brought her home. The king was instantly smitten and took her in, going against the advice of his entire council, who discovered that not only was the troubled waif hooked to the gills on Papa, but she'd spent her childhood in brothels being violated by just about every species of perverted biped in the galaxy. On top of that, she'd apparently murdered someone. There was nothing royal about this little lass. But the Stone King didn't concern himself with contrary opinions. He raised her up as his own, housing her in the castle and educating her at the Academy of Athena. The real uproar had ensued after he broke tradition and wed her to his heir, thus securing her path to becoming the first queen in centuries who wasn't highborn. The nobles of Synchrona City had yet another reason for their backbiting. King Jonathan took it as a point of pride. Stella told herself that somehow, the Parsai had decreed that she was now a princess, but no matter how she tried to enjoy the luxury of her new life, the burdens of leadership lurked in her mind like a serpent's tooth. This orphan whore would soon be queen.
Valentine, do you believe in demons? I just had the strangest excursion.
demons, like wraiths and vampires, Your Grace?
Vampires, come now. Bokhara is brimming with them, and not shape-shifting Hunics and Ophidians and Mantis.
She tugged on the golden goat's head brooch, tightening the shawl around her neck.
No, I mean the fallen ones. Spooks sent from Hades to haunt our world with their supernatural powers, like the scrolls tell us.
This kingdom is haunted enough. Not sure it needs the underworld's help.
Valentine paused reluctantly.
They say too much leisure. Well, the machine can turn on you. Perhaps you just need a good night's rest, Your Grace.
Oh, I see. So now both you and Father are keeping tabs on my excursions? Valentine, I told you, I can't see.
Valentine did her best to respect the boundaries of her domestic duties, but Stella, for the most part, treated her like a friend. Both were surprised by how close they'd grown.
I'm sorry, Your Grace.
She brightened the lantern and stretched out her long, furry arm. Over 7 feet tall and covered in short yellow fur, she had brown stripes on her arms and legs and spots on her tail and torso up to her pointy black-tipped ears. Valentine was a cat. She'd been exiled from her home planet, Lyra, and then, like so many others during the Scorpion Wars, wound up on Dera Dune, a small moon of Saturn. Few refugees had fared so well. The princess had numerous handmaids, but clearly one favorite. Kaelor Genki was pacing outside the king's door. Next to him was a 14-year-old guard named Beacon, staring straight ahead, unflinching as they approached.
Oh, Your Grace, he is not good.
Genki anxiously confessed.
He sent everyone away, asked only for you.
I loathe this wretch.
She did her best to hide her disdain. The king's head mender, Genki had sworn the Black to become a paladin cleric and then continued on to study medicine at the Tibby. Hanging from his neck was a large silver staff of Asclepius, a rod coiled by a serpent, the emblem of his certification into the healing arts.
He's been rambling on and on about wild conspiracies. I fear the infection has reached his brain. I urge you to brace yourself. The termination of Lava Lung is not pretty.
Like all Kaelors, Genki's head was shaved, and he wore the traditional black robe over a white turtleneck. But his long ginger beard made him stand out amongst his stodgy theologian brethren. Weeks earlier, he diagnosed Jonathan with lava lung and quickly declared the aggressive virus late stage, untreatable. Genki had a distinguished service record as the king's chief physician, but Stella had sensed something off about him since the moment they'd met. There were rumors he owed hundreds of thousands of hands to Ganef, the shape-shifting mafia boss who owned the Relulus 9 casino, and he was too cozy with members of both the Synod and Sephira for her liking. He had a mouth for each face, both ready to polish the apples of whoever might grow his coffer. She'd mentioned her mistrust to the king, but he called her paranoid. Maybe so, but years as a sex slave and street urchin had finally tuned her intuition. It didn't take much to percolate her doubts.
Did you call the savant?
No, Your Grace. He wouldn't allow it.
Genki replied, lightly grasping her forearm in his wrinkled, clammy hands. She pulled away.
How long does he have?
Oh, Your Grace. Only Decima knows the time of our passing. She measures the thread of our days.
How long?
She barked, in no mood for his sniveling.
In my expert opinion, I'd be surprised if he lasted past the gloaming.
Call the savant.
But Your Grace, he forbade it.
The king may not value rituals, but I'll not see him pass without the parting prayer. He's stubborn as a locust mule, but I'll soon be queen. I'll not don the crown tormented by something so easily remedied. Call the savant.
Stella had embraced chronism for a spell while kicking Papa, studying the temporal scrolls with Rector Tomas. While the king and his heir might scoff at religious superstitions, she'd make sure that Jonathan's death would be immaculate. Why tempt Baphomet? Beacon lifted his leg and banged his long boom rod on the cold stone floor, announcing the princess's entrance into the king's solar. Stella called Valentine inside while Genki lurked at the door.
Close that.
Valentine slammed the heavy wood in his face.